7 a.m. for more of your calls, your emails, and your tweets, but now live coverage of the House.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., September 14, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Jeff Denham to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You want to know why we have a budget deficit? We have a budget deficit because we have a jobs deficit. And we have a jobs deficit because our nation has been outsourcing millions of jobs for over a quarter century. White House after White House and Congress after Congress has allowed our manufacturing and jobs base to be whittled away through a trade regimen that outsources U.S. production and American jobs, financed by the same big Wall Street banks that caused the financial meltdown. Year after year, the United States continues to rack up enormous trade deficits with nation after nation. The numbers don't lie, and they tell us that over 2.7 million manufacturing jobs alone were lost just during the Bush administration. Washington must finally confront our so-called free trade failed policies if we are going to be serious about creating jobs in order to balance the budget. Last year, the trade deficit was another astonishing $500 billion. Imagine $500 billion, $500 billion, $500 billion, $500 billion, year after year after year. That equals, just for last year, 7 million American jobs that were not created here because of our job-killing trade policies. Rather than stopping this enormous outsourcing of America, we're being offered up more of the same. More failed free trade agreements, this time with Korea, Panama, Colombia. Has Washington learned nothing? Or are the powers bearing on Washington so great the American people can't be heard? They're being suppressed. These agreements are another expansion of the same policies and processes that were enacted with NAFTA. We were all told in 1993 that NAFTA would create millions of jobs. Instead, we have seen exactly the opposite. Millions of jobs decimated. Our trade deficit with Mexico just last year was over $66 billion in the red. In 1993, proponents of NAFTA like Gary Hofbauer and economist Jeffrey Schott promised we would have, and I quote them, an annual current account surplus with Mexico of about $10 billion through the 1990s. That was an absolute falsehood. Obviously, they were all wrong, dead wrong. Instead, we saw over a third of all manufacturing jobs in the United States disappear since we signed that agreement, and $1 trillion accumulated trade deficit with Mexico. Not a single year in the black. We heard the exact same fairy tale regarding China's permanent most favored nation status. We were told that that agreement in 1998 would create millions of jobs in America. Instead, the result has been a cumulative $2 trillion trade deficit with China alone. When you think about the budget deficit, you better think about the trade deficit because they are absolutely interlinked. You're not going to balance the budget until the American people go back to work, and they can't go back to work when their jobs are being sent elsewhere. If you always do what you have always done, you will always get what you always got. The Economic Policy Institute's analysis predicts that the agreement that's proposed with South Korea will cost us an additional 159,000 jobs in our country. Since this January, we have already rung up, look at the numbers, over $7 billion trade deficit with South Korea, and passage of the proposed agreement, you think it's going to make it better? If you want to see just how poorly negotiated the Korea deal is, take a quick look at the auto provisions. There's no reciprocity. Last year, Korea sold nearly 500,000 cars in our country, 500,000 cars. The United States, you know how much we sell to them? 6,000. What kind of deal is that? And we'll be lucky if under this agreement, where there's a hope that we might sell 75,000 cars to Korea, they get 500,000, we get a handful. How's that a credible plan to create jobs in our country? And then there are the other two agreements with Panama and Colombia, the latest NAFTA expansion. What are the major commercial interests there? The Government Accountability Office has identified Panama as the major haven for, guess what? Tax avoidance. Panama is a popular destination for the very same multinational corporations that want to avoid paying their fair share of U.S. taxes by creating offshore subsidiaries. And how about Colombia, which is the most dangerous country in the world if you care about labor rights, and no free country in the world does not have labor rights. Over 2,000 trade unionists, 2,000, have been assassinated there since 1990. What a pleasant place to do business. And there has been no justice for their victims and their families in the majority of those murder cases. And what is the largest economic interest we have with Colombia? It has 3 letters. It isn't a place to export U.S.-made goods. Rather, it's oil. How can those that support these failed trade agreements want more? We need to create jobs in this country again, because in order to balance the budget, you have to put the American people back to work, and you can't do that when you're outsourcing more of their jobs. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The chairman recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 2 years, 14 million Americans have been out of work, yet illegal workers hold 7 million jobs. It is inexcusable that American workers have to compete with illegal immigrants for scarce jobs. Congress has the opportunity to open up millions of jobs for unemployed Americans by requiring all U.S. employers to use E-Verify. This program checks the Social Security numbers of new hires. E-Verify is free, quick, and easy to use. Individuals eligible to work in the U.S. are confirmed 99.5% of the time. The public also supports E-Verify. According to a recent Rasmussen poll, 82% of likely voters think businesses should be required to use E-Verify to determine if a new employee is in the country legally. This is one of the most important job creation bills Congress should pass and the President should sign. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes.
Ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, this week the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction began work on a roadmap to bring down our nation's deficit and restore our fiscal health. They heard from Doug Elmendorf, Director of the Congressional Budget Office, who reiterated once again what we already know. Our nation's current fiscal position is not sustainable. We also know that from the problem we're facing stems in part from buying things without paying for them, including 2 wars, tax cuts for the wealthiest in America, and a prescription drug program. But what matters now is taking action. Over the month of August, we heard very clearly from the American public that they want us to work together on the issues they're most concerned about: jobs and the deficit. Action on one issue will directly impact on the other. Creating jobs and growing the economy is one of the most important things we can do to bring down the deficit. And getting a handle on our fiscal situation will give confidence to encourage economic growth and job creation. Both the Bowles-Simpson and Domenici-Rivlin fiscal commissions supported this tenet by calling for immediate action to boost the economy while laying out a plan to reduce the deficit over the long term. This is why the Joint Select Committee must succeed. We have a responsibility to show Americans and the international community that we can meet the challenges we face, that we can join together and make the tough decisions necessary to spur growth and to bring our debt under control. I believe the committee must go beyond the $1.5 trillion target in the deficit reduction bill if we hope to strengthen our economy and seriously change our nation's fiscal outlook. Over 60 economists and former members of Congress signed a letter encouraging the Joint Select Committee to reach the biggest agreement possible, and I want to join with them in that request. In their letter, signed by co-chairs of both the Bowles-Simpson and Domenici-Rivlin fiscal commissions, among others, they state, and I quote, "We believe that a go-big approach that goes well beyond the $1.5 trillion deficit reduction goal that the committee has been charged with and includes major reforms of entitlement programs and the tax code is necessary to bring the debt down to manageable and sustainable levels, improve the long-term fiscal imbalance, reassure markets, and restore Americans' faith in the political system." Close quote. I am in absolute agreement with that proposition. As the letter just quoted indicates, the committee must also put all options on the table. That's a challenge on the Republican side. It's a challenge on the Democratic side. But it must be done, because we cannot get to where we need to get without doing so. The math is irrefutable. We cannot get to where we need to go if we ignore revenues or if we fail to ensure our safety net is sustainable for generations to come. A balanced approach that looks at defense spending, revenues, and entitlements is the only real way we're going to put America's fiscal house back in order. A balanced approach is also key to making sure everyone pays their fair share. We cannot ask the middle-class families and seniors to bear the entire burden of balancing the budget. The most well-off among us, which is most of us, by the way, in this body, must also contribute to that objective. But as we focus on ways to restore our budget balance, we cannot and must not forget the immediate jobs crisis that too many families face. Any plan to bring down the deficit must start, as Bowles-Simpson and Domenici-Rivlin both observed, must start with getting people back to work. That is why I hope Republicans and Democrats will work together to bring the President's proposed American Jobs Act to the floor for a vote without delay. As the President said, we have 14 months to wait to the next election. People without jobs, people whose homes are underwater, people who have lost their homes, they don't have 14 months to make. The jobs program suggested by the President mirrors many components included in the House Democrats' Make It in America agenda and will help create jobs in the short term. All of us, Democrats and Republicans alike, must be invested in the committee's success. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to be committed to the success of reaching agreement in this Committee of 12. This is a time to put partisan politics aside and do the hard things, very hard things, the courageous things that we have to do for our country. I believe we're equal to the task. And I say to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, if we are not equal to the task, then all of our citizens will rightfully be extraordinarily disappointed, as they are today, in their elected representatives on both sides of the aisle. Success of this committee, success of this House and the Senate in reaching and meeting the challenge that confronts us is essential if the confidence level of our own citizens and the international community is to be raised and given the level necessary for future success. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, many years ago, the Second American Revolution took place when Washington, D.C. was invaded by the British in the War of 1812. Many forget that the Capitol, the White House, Washington, D.C. was burned to the ground by the British. And after the War of 1812 was over with, America found itself in a situation that's not untoo familiar with us today. It was out of money. So what did people decide to do here in this body of Congress of how to get more money into the federal treasury? They thought of a unique approach that maybe we ought to think of and do today. Right now we talk about raising taxes, cutting spending, we need more revenue. Maybe we ought to think outside of the box when it comes to revenue instead of more government taking from the people and giving it to its special groups. Let's do what they did at the end of the War of 1812. The federal government decided that it would sell some of the land to Americans. What a novel thought. And let Americans own America. They could produce that land, and then they could pay more taxes. And that's what they did at the end of the War of 1812. We talk about the land in America. Who the biggest landowner in this country is? Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam owns 27% of the land mass in the United States. This poster here shows the land area in red, including Alaska, that is owned by the federal government, Uncle Sam. 27% of the land. Half of the land west of the Mississippi, or in the west, belongs to the federal government. Those folks in the west, half of it belongs to Uncle Sam. He's their neighbor in almost every state. It's different in the east because much of that land was sold at the end of the War of 1812. Now, 27%, what does that mean? That's really hard to understand how much that is. If you were to superimpose the 27% of the land mass in the United States into Europe, you would find that Uncle Sam would own almost all of Europe. Western Europe is about 27% of the land mass of the United States. And, of course, that includes the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Italy, Poland, and even Spain. Now we're talking about a lot of land. Does Uncle Sam really need all of that land? Much of it's unproductive, not paying any taxes, not paying any revenue to local and state governments. So maybe we should do something that our forefathers, our ancestors did. Sell some of that land to Americans and allow that revenue to come into the federal treasury so we can pay off all our debts that we have accumulated over the years. 27% of the land mass is 623 million acres in this country. Ronald Reagan tried to do that when he was president, but it did not go very far at all. You know, even President Obama mentioned about a month ago that there's 300 acres in Los Angeles County that's owned by the federal government. We could sell that for $2 billion. So maybe we need to think outside of the box. I've introduced the American Land Act. We talk about the American Jobs Act. The American Land Act would require that the federal government sell a portion of that land over a period of years. Now, I want to be careful to state, we're not talking about the national parks. We're not talking about Yosemite. We're not talking about the marshes and environmentally sensitive areas in this country. We're talking about unused land by the federal government. and then we could raise some revenue. The OMB says that much of this could be up to about $200 billion of land or revenue that would be brought into the United States. Sell it to Americans, and when Americans can own America, they can develop that land, and then they can be productive, and then they can pay more taxes. Land, property tax, primarily goes to local and state governments, which pays for our school systems. So that undeveloped land, that unused land, some of that should be sold to Americans and let Americans buy America. Real property in the hands of real Americans. What a novel thought that is. You know, Uncle Sam, the federal government, is all about power and control over everything. Loosen up a little and let America buy part of America. Uncle Sam shouldn't prevent Americans from having a real stake or share in our country, the United States of America. It doesn't belong to Uncle Sam, at least it shouldn't. It should belong to Americans. And the United States owns most of the grandest state in this country, and it's time to let more Americans own it, because America should belong to Americans. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate that there's an attempt to scapegoat Americans' unions for the economic problems that beset us. After all, it was not Americans' grocery clerks, nurses, teachers, postal workers, and electricians that nearly caused the meltdown of the economy. It wasn't Americans' labor unions that were pushing for tax loopholes that made our revenue system a hopeless, inefficient mess. It wasn't unions that pushed for shortcuts for worker safety that produced the tragedy that we've seen in our mines. Americans' working men and women didn't engineer poor loans, systematically cheat consumers, transform financial institutions into giant casinos. No doubt there were some consumers who took unfair advantage, as well as others who were not as vigilant as they should have been in the financial meltdown. But the truth is they were part of an unprecedented economic scheme that played on those weaknesses, the gullibility, and some individual greed, to make it into a vast industry. Are there some areas where unions are too effective in securing benefits for their members? That probably depends on who you ask about and the give and take of the collective bargaining process. The leadership of unions are, in fact, much more democratic than their corporate counterparts. Union officials are routinely challenged for re-election. There are insurgents even in the most powerful and entrenched unions, something one seldom sees on the boards of public corporations. How many business directors are defeated? It's not easy to even have opposing nominees through shareholder democracy. It's pretty sketchy compared with what happens with unions. There is a very direct remedy for union power in the negotiation process. For 18 years, I was a local elected official, part of that time responsible for a collective bargaining program. I like to think that I bargained tough, but that I bargained fair. But I bargained. I've supported collective bargaining rights for public employees since I was first in the Oregon legislature, and still believe that honest, tough, principled negotiations will lead to the best results. Having someone attempt to dictate working conditions unilaterally is not calculated to produce enhanced productivity. It matters how people are treated and how they feel. Employee-owned corporations illustrate this principle in spades, some of which are not only employee-owned, but have unions in addition. One of the best performing of the world's economy is Germany, where they still manufacture and have a huge export market for high-value products. The Germans work hard to integrate labor and business with government in the decision-making process, something that is sadly too rare in the United States. Unions are not the answer for every employee and every company, but every employee and every company ought to have that option. Even companies that are non-union benefit. I've had Executives from successful companies candidly tell me that they treat their employees right because they don't want them to unionize. Even these non-union company employees benefit from higher wages, better benefits, and a system that respects worker rights because of the competition with the unions. Instead of treating employees fairly by allowing them to organize, far too many corporations have chosen instead to attack the fundamentals of collective bargaining. It is today an art form in some companies to stall, delay, intimidate, even flagrantly violate the laws of collective bargaining in this country, weak as they are and ineffectively as they are enforced. Collective bargaining has been systematically under attack by my Republican friends in Congress, as Republican administrations have fought to have a National Labor Relations Board that is toothless, passive, and unable or unwilling to protect the rights of employees to organize. This is not calculated to produce a spirit of cooperation. It's not clear that people need to cheat in order to avoid any excesses of collective bargaining. I would argue the opposite. It's not just workers in companies, union and non-union, that benefit from unions. American society benefits. It was organized labor that spearheaded the effort for a 40-hour work week. It is not just rhetoric that unions brought you the weekend. Unions have played a key role in extending security to millions of America's workplace, consumer safety, and environmental protections.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Legendary Georgia businessman recently called the Obama administration, quote, the single biggest impediment to job growth, unquote. That same man, Mr. Bernie Marcus, also says that the business that he founded would have never succeeded if he was trying to start it today. Home Depot, his Georgia-based company, currently has more than 2,200 stores all across the United States, and they support more than 300,000 American jobs. And they generated $68 billion in revenue just last year. Now imagine the impact on our country if companies that start out like Home Depot, that started as an individual store or other small businesses, weren't able to flourish. That is what the Obama administration is trying to do to the American dream today. By creating a huge bill with Obamacare and a failed stimulus bill, and piling thousands of new government regulations onto the backs of small businesses, it's no wonder that job creators are afraid to expand and hire new people. And so, after 2.5 years of growing the federal government and $4.5 trillion in spending later, the Obama administration has given us another proposal of the same old failed policies. Unfortunately, their latest solution to our 9% unemployment rate comes with a price tag of almost $500 billion. Money that we just simply do not have. So to pay for the American Jobs Act, as I like to call it, Stimulus Part 2, our Democrat leaders want to hike taxes on families and job creators. We've been down this road before. The stimulus did not work 2 years ago, and it will not work today. Hiking taxes in the middle of a recession will make our economy worse, not better. When will this administration learn that more of the same just simply isn't good enough anymore? Jobs will come when government gets out of the way, by getting rid of Obamacare, stopping the reckless spending here in Washington, and the threat of higher taxes, and by ending the uncertainty in the marketplace. Congress needs to pass my jobs bill, which would immediately and permanently lower the corporate tax rate to 0. And it will permanently lower the tax the capital gains tax to zero. This will stimulate our small businesses so that they can do what they do best, to grow, expand, and to thrive. In the words of Mr. Marcus, the founder of Home Depot, quote, "It's time to stand up and fight," unquote. The free enterprise system has made this country what it is today, and we must have policy that makes it prosper. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to ask us to take action on a scathing Department of Justice investigation of a police department that, quote, regularly violates the constitutional rights of civilians through illegal searches, detentions, and arrests, that, quote, continues to demonstrate a deliberate indifference to the public safety and the civil rights of individuals engaging in protected speech activities during protests. A police force where, quote, officers engage in a pattern and practice of unreasonable force and other misconduct to suppress the exercise of protected First Amendment rights. The report details the abuse against the people of Puerto Rico that they are facing by the Puerto Rican Police Department. On this floor, I said, I rise to bring the urgent attention of the U.S. House of Representatives to a human rights and civil rights crisis. I further stated, where the right of students to protest and speak their minds is being denied with clubs and mace and pepper spray. I spoke those words 7 months ago on this floor. The DOJ report states that the governor of Puerto Rico has, quote, supreme authority over the police. Did he use that supreme authority to respond to Puerto Ricans who asked for help? Yes, he did. The governor's ruling party took immediate action after I detailed the abuse. The ruling party was outraged. It was outraged at me. Facing a civil rights crisis, the ruling party of Puerto Rico acted without hesitation, convening the legislature to urgently pass legislation to censure me for speaking out. In part, the censure reads, quote, Congressman Luis Gutierrez made false allegations about a supposed human rights crisis in Puerto Rico. He expressed himself in a denigrating and malicious manner about the honorable body of the Puerto Rican police, all of which tends to hurt the image and good name of Puerto Rico, end quote. Here's the problem. The ruling party of Puerto Rico has made clear time and time again they're not concerned about the abuse of the people, only that the world might notice that abuse. They don't seem to understand that if you love people, you stand up and you speak out, not pretend that everything is all right. For standing up, the government of Puerto Rico gave me a 600-word censure. But the government didn't give one word, not one word of censure to what happened to Rachel Hiskes. And here's what the DOJ described happened to her. A student journalist, quote, Rachel, entered the Capitol with other individuals and attempted to access the Senate chambers. Puerto Rico Police Department officers who had been dispatched to the Capitol earlier in the day stopped her and hit her. She was not resistant or combative, the report continues to say. Hiskes then sat in the hallway with other visitors in protest. A Capitol employee then sprayed her and others with chemical irritants. As she tried to get up, an officer then came and hit her across the back with a baton, causing her to fall. An officer continued to push and strike her with this baton, driving her towards the doorway. When she finally reached the door of the Capitol in Puerto Rico and had her back to the officer shoved her one more time onto the concrete stairs, using his baton and hitting her in the neck. Hiskes was never arrested and charged with any crime. Instead of protecting people like Rachel, the government derided the people. This governor's chief of staff, a man he has absurdly tasked with responding to the Department of Justice report, said protesting workers would be treated as terrorists and boasted he would personally kick protesting students off campus. This government cannot fix a problem they helped to create and expand. The students, bloodied with batons, deserve more. The workers beaten and the journalists pepper sprayed deserve more. And to be clear, the many honorable and brave members of the Puerto Rican police officers, men and women who are incorruptible, who do their jobs right and risk their lives every day, they deserve more too. When crimes like these are brought to light, we expect criminal indictments. I want to see a special prosecutor appointed, the grand jury seated, the trials begun, and see those responsible, not just the police officers following orders, but those who directed the police to systematically repress free speech, sent to jail. The goal must be to reestablish the rule of law and to reestablish a police department in Puerto Rico that protects and serves the people. The goal must be a police department fighting crime, not committing crime. The goal must be that no government can act with impunity against its people. And I have one last recommendation. The governor of Puerto Rico should apologize to his people. Puerto Ricans have called out for help. In response, the governor and the ruling party have led an effort to demonize them for standing up for their civil rights. Governor, the Department of Justice of the United States of America has just made clear that your people were right and you were wrong, and it is time for you to say you're sorry.
The gentleman recognizes from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are men who watch life go by as a spectator, and then there are the Ted Mallorys of the world. In one of life's greatest mysteries, Ted Mallory's time on earth came to an end June the 26th after a late diagnosis of stomach cancer. Major General Theodore Ted Mallory III had embraced his many gifts and lived one of the fullest lives I have ever been privileged enough to encounter. The Bible says iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Ted made it his personal mission to sharpen the lives of those men and women around him, and he pushed people to their highest potential. After attending Auburn University, Ted entered into the U.S. Air Force Training School in 1965 and graduated with the U.S. Air Force Outstanding Graduate Officer Award, among many other awards that he obtained while in training. These were the first of many commendations Ted would receive throughout his 36-year military career. A recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Meritorious Service Medal, National Defense Service Medal with 1 Bronze Service Star, Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross with Palm, and Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Ted truly embodied the ideal airman. He was also awarded the Daughters of the American Revolution Medal of Honor, and I would need an hour on this floor, Mr. Speaker, time just to list all the rest of Ted's accomplishments. His education did not stop at Auburn University. In addition to the military professional education programs offered through the Air Force, Ted is also an alumni of the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. After he left active duty service, Ted entered into the Air National Guard, where he served for 30 years and held the roles of Group Commander, Wing Commander, and Chief of Staff. He was promoted to Major General in 1997 and retired in 2001 as Commander of the Air National Guard Air Education and Training Command. While serving in the Air National Guard, he remained active in his community, serving on the Fayette County School Board for 10 years as chairman, and on the Georgia School Board Association as president in 1986. Ted served on several additional boards, including my Academy Nomination Board, and was president of Joseph Sam School Board of Directors, a school serving the needs of children with mental and physical disabilities. And Ted took me on a tour of that facility about 2 months before he passed away. His accomplishments reached far beyond military service, though. Ted was also a very successful businessman in the aviation industry. His focus was always on safety in flying, where he was training new pilots or as a senior vice president of flight operations and chief safety and security officer for Airstar Air Cargo. General Mallory is now flying sorties far above us all, watching down on his loved ones left behind, and my wife, Joan, and I will continue to pray for Alice, his wife of 44 years, his soulmate, his children, Teddy and TJ and their families, his grandchildren, Mallory and Thomas, and his sister and brother-in-law, Molly and Tom. May all those who have been touched by Ted's life find comfort knowing that his legacy will live on in both our lives and our memories. So, Ted, until we meet again one day, I want to thank you for everything you did to better our lives and our country. I miss you, Ted. We all miss you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the U.S. Embassy and NATO headquarters in Kabul were attacked. The Taliban, which we know has exerted its influence in many of the remote regions of the country, is now flexing its muscle in the supposedly secure capital. It's just the latest piece of evidence that the military occupation of Afghanistan is having exactly the opposite of its intended effect. Nearly a decade after we allegedly defeated the Taliban and drove them from power, they remain as fearless and undaunted as ever. The longer we have boots on the ground, the more we prop up the very enemy we're supposed to be fighting. And for this, the American people have the privilege of shelling out $10 billion a month. I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle, the ones who are lecturing us every day about cutting spending, isn't there something better we can do with the taxpayers' money? Well, it turns out there is, and it would do more to promote security and counterterrorism than waging a bloody and violent war. For years now, I've been promoting a platform I call Smart Security. Smart Security represents a wholesale change in the way we protect our country and promote our values abroad. It puts us in a position of partner, not invader. It's smart because it treats warfare as a very, very last resort. It's smart because it uses different tools to engage other nations and resolve global conflict. It's smart because it emphasizes diplomacy. It pursues multilateralism, promotes democracy, and respects human rights. And it's smart because it would dramatically increase our investment in international development projects that will lift people up instead of tearing their country down. What we need, Mr. Speaker, in Afghanistan and poor countries around the world is a civilian surge, one that will rebuild infrastructure, power lines, schools, hospitals, economic opportunity, and much more, whatever that nation would find useful that we could help with. You think it sounds expensive? It's a drop in the bucket. I'm talking about pennies on the dollar compared to a 10-year military occupation. In fact, the Washington Post noted last week that civilian efforts in Afghanistan have cost the United States about $1.7 billion over the last 2 years. That's compared, $1.7 billion over 2 years compared to $10 billion a month in Afghanistan. And even that level of funding is now facing tough scrutiny here on the Hill. Are you kidding me? Let's put this into perspective. $1.7 billion, we spend that much on the war in Afghanistan in less than a week, and that's what we invest in 2 years of civilian efforts. If we ended this war, we could reinvest the money in the bigger, bolder surge that we really need, and still have plenty left over to create jobs right here at home and meet other important obligations. But right now, Mr. Speaker, our priorities are completely distorted. We're sacrificing the lives of our troops in a morally reprehensible war that's fiscally reckless and strategically an epic, historic failure. After 10 years, it's time to bring our troops home. Make the change we so desperately need. Embrace and adopt the principles of smart security. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Merchant, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few weeks, as I traveled across my district, the 24th District of Texas, it became very obvious to me that the #1 issue on the minds of my constituents is the out-of-control federal spending. In the last legislative session in Texas, my former colleagues in the Texas legislature passed a resolution addressing this out-of-control federal spending. This resolution requested that the Congress pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and send it to the states for its ratification. This is the resolution I have in my hand that was sent to me by the state representatives and the senators in my district that I represent. By overwhelming votes in both houses, the House and the Senate, the Texas legislature passed this resolution that I'm holding right here in my hand. The Texas House of Representatives approved this bill by a vote of 115 to 17 on April the 13th, and the Senate adopted the bill on May 19th by a vote of 28 to 3. This resolution calls on Congress to enact the best measure to stop runaway federal spending. We can best ensure our future prosperity by passing a balanced budget amendment. I would like to personally thank the members of the Texas legislature that represent parts of my district, the 24th District of Texas. And I applaud them for sending this resolution urging us to take action. My sincere thanks goes to State Senator Jane Nelson, State Senator Chris Harris, State Senator John Corona, and to State Representatives Vicki Truitt, Bert Solomons, Linda Harper Brown, and Todd Staples. These brave men and women have taken a courageous stand on this issue, and I feel it's my obligation to follow through with their request. The federal government must end sustained deficit spending. In fiscal year 2010, the federal government accumulated a deficit in excess of $1.3 trillion, an annual deficit that exceeds the entire gross state product of Texas. In order to finance our current deficit, we borrow 40 cents of every dollar we spend. 40 cents on the dollar. Money that could easily go to pay our national debt down. The longer we wait only results in more debt. Debt that we will pass along to our children and to our grandchildren. Our national debt currently stands at $14.7 trillion, which equals a debt per taxpayer of $131,288. This is a problem that we can no longer ignore. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the Texas legislature's request for prompt passage of a balanced budget amendment. I ask for unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, consent to include in my remarks the Texas legislature's
objection so ordered.
House Concurrent Resolution number 18. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to discuss the topic of underage drinking. It is an issue that challenges every generation of public officials, parents, educators, law enforcement, industry members, and concerned citizens. But through bipartisan leadership and almost 3 decades of public and private effort, our nation has made some substantial progress. I mention bipartisan because it was President Reagan who teamed up with Democrats in Congress to enact the National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984. At the signing ceremony, the President's remarks are a great lesson in federalism and national leadership that remains very important today. He said that underage drinking is a problem that is, and I quote, bigger than the individual states, end of quote. He called underage drinking a grave national problem that touches all our lives. President Reagan concluded that with the problem so clear-cut and the proven solution at hand, we have no misgivings about this judicious use of federal power. I said that this was a bipartisan effort, and our colleague from the other body, Senator Lautenberg of New Jersey, was instrumental in guiding the measure through Congress, and he continues to be a forceful advocate for young people today. According to the National Highway Safety Administration, the number of fatalities in teen drunk driving crashes has declined 74% since the early 1980s. Studies from the Department of Transportation and Government Accountability Office indicate that the 21-year-old drinking age has saved tens of thousands of lives. Most government measures of underage drinking have also declined. Parents, educators, and other adults who have influence on young people need to recognize that older teens are still capable of making youthful mistakes, and some of these mistakes can be fatal. We should not do anything that allow our young people to obtain alcohol before they reach the legal drinking age. We need to remain involved in their lives and do everything we can to encourage and insist that they make responsible decisions. Back in 2006, our colleague Lucille Rawball-Allett led the effort to enact the Sober Truth on Preventing Underage Drinking Act, better known as the STOP Act. The law established a framework for cooperation among federal agencies with responsibility to address underage drinking. In mid-July, we received a report from the Federal Interagency Coordinating Committee that was formally established by the STOP Act. It documents federal government prevention initiatives across 17 agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission, which created the We Don't Serve Teens program as a public education and outreach initiative. The 2011 launch of We Don't Serve Teens occurred last week in Chicago and throughout the nation. One purpose of the We Don't Serve Teens initiative is to inform parents and all adults that teen drinking is not inevitable. Crown Imports and Miller's Coors, the number 2 and number 3 American beer suppliers, are both headquartered in the district I represent in Chicago. Both companies have supported the We Don't Serve Teens program since it began in 2006. I am pleased that these two companies have joined the FTC, members of Congress, Chicago officials, and thousands of concerned citizens to support We Don't Serve Teens. We need everyone at the table. Industry members have a unique ability to reach out directly to local stores, bars, restaurants, and other places where alcohol is served. The We Don't Serve Teens message is reinforced. I commend these efforts, and especially do I commend these distributors of these alcoholic beverages in their effort to make sure that teens handle alcohol responsibly, and the best way is not at all. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ask the unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today as the founding member and a co-chair of the Out of Poverty Caucus. The 42-member caucus work every day to ensure that we meet our economic and, yes, our moral obligation to the most vulnerable across this nation, those people facing or living in poverty. Yesterday, the United States Census Bureau released data showing that 2.6 million more Americans fell into poverty, making 46.2 million people living in poverty in America. This is the highest number since the Census Bureau started keeping these records in 1959. 15% of Americans lived in poverty last year. The poverty rate among African Americans in 2010 was 27.4%. For non-white Hispanics, it was 26.6%. For Asian Pacific Islanders, it was 12.1%. and for non-Hispanic whites it was 9.9%. Digging deeper into the disparities, the data reveals that the real median income declined for white and black households between 2009 and 2010. Real median income for each race and Hispanic-oriented groups have not recovered to the pre-2001 recession all-time highs. According to the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, the census data reveals that both the number and percentages of people living in deep poverty hit record highs, meaning that some 20.5 million Americans had cash incomes below, mind you, $11,000 for a family of four. In addition, the census reports that the median household income fell 2.3% or $1,100 in 2010. Those at the bottom of the income scale have lost far more ground than those at the top. Income inequality continues to grow at alarming rates. And we know that this crisis is even worse in communities of color. The national average of children living in poverty in America is 20%. That's outrageous. Now, for African American children, it's 36%, and for Latino children, it's 31%. That's hard to believe. The median net worth of white families in 2009 was 20 times greater than that of the average black family and 18 times greater than the average Hispanic family. Now, these are not just statistics. These are real human beings who deserve an opportunity to live the American dream, which to our dismay, unfortunately, has turned into a nightmare for millions. So the Out of Poverty Caucus co-chairs, Congressman Baca, Butterfield, Conyers, Honda, and myself, we sent a letter to the President asking him to address our nation's job crisis, which is a national emergency, through a bold package of direct investment which is aimed at our nation's most vulnerable, those facing or living in poverty. We ask that he consider including programs like the TANF Emergency Contingency Fund, which gets money out of the door across the country efficiently and effectively, and it puts people to work. We ask for on-the-job training directed at communities most affected by the Great Recession, which of course is the depression for these communities, and programs we ask for that will help train and put our nation's young people to work. Thankfully, and we are pleased that in the President's jobs bill, he did embrace some of our suggestions, including building on programs like TANF Emergency Contingency Fund and on-the-job training, youth employment and extension initiatives, and of course of extending unemployment compensation. But we also still believe that unemployment compensation must be extended to those who have exhausted their benefits after 99 weeks until we create these jobs, because there are 4 individuals looking for 1 job. After 99 weeks, these individuals, of course, are no longer eligible for unemployment compensation. So we're asking that H.R. 589 be considered, which is a bill by Congressman Bobby Scott and myself to extend this unemployment compensation by 14 weeks. That's the least we can do. Make no mistake about it. People are suffering. Children don't have enough to eat. People want and need jobs, as we saw during the Congressional Black Caucus's very important and successful jobs tour and the Congressional Progressive Caucus's Speak Out for Jobs Now tour. People want our economy to grow, but they know that they need a job to do this, that our country needs full employment for people to be able to help turn the economy around. More and more people now are falling into poverty than ever before, and from all walks of life and educational backgrounds. So the Out of Poverty Caucus will continue to sound the alarm about the growing crisis of people living in or facing poverty. And I want to remind everyone that many middle-income people are on the verge of falling into poverty, and as we say, many are 1 paycheck away from poverty.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today, as I have done virtually every week, to tell a story of a man or a woman in the military who's been raped. 19,000 are raped every year in the military. Only 13% report the rapes because there has been such an ineffective addressing